and in class, and we're gonna I'm gonna show you guys off because you guys are doing a great job. Okay, again, not to increase the pressure. At some point, I would like to talk more about Project 2 and field questions. I'm sure that you have some questions. Maybe they're not formulated yet because you haven't figured out what you're going to do. You can't remember who your teammates are, but that's okay. As the time comes closer to when we're going to do the presentations, I would like to field more questions. Okay, so start writing down questions as they come up and email me or GChat or anything like that. I respond generally pretty quickly. If you email me, this is a directive to all students that I interact with. If you email me and I don't respond within 24 hours, it doesn't mean that I don't care about you. I do. It means that your email got pushed to the second page and it's dead to me until I get to that second page, which sometimes can be like a month, okay? So don't take it personally. If you email me and I don't respond within 24 hours, I not only give you permission, but I demand that you email me again, okay? Just poke me again, because if there's a weird period when I can't get to my email, it's amazing how quickly, what is the maximum number of emails you can have on one page? 50? Oh, 50 is like 3 hours in my day. So email me again, and it's okay. I don't take it personally, and I certainly understand. If you're frustrated with me, G-chat me, because I always get the G-chats, okay? So please, please, please do that. And PEM725 is the way to get me on G-chat, and you can always ping me. I never take it. If I'm there, I will respond right away. Okay. Oh, there is so much good shit in the news that's related to Bayesian statistics. You guys are living like the golden era. So what's in the news? We're going to talk about this in mysteries. What's in the news? Oh, we have this debacle in the psychology where none of our work can be replicated. We suck. It's not that we suck, it's that we have very high standards now by imposing what researchers believe is like the standard for evidence, which is replicability and incidentally generalizability. And because of that, it's like revisionist history. We now have new standards by which we're gauging old work and old contributions that previous researchers didn't have to account for. And there's no crisis, by the way. You know, everybody wants to talk about this replicability crisis. It's like, this is like women's suffrage or segregation or anything like that, is that we have now a new perspective and that we have to change. And there are a lot of old people who don't want to change. But the cool thing about this whole process is that what you're learning, even the rudiments of what you're learning today and these days, will become invaluable. Because a lot of what we're going to talk about today about the comparison and the strengths and weaknesses and kind of the balance sheet between frequentist models and subjectivist models, which is Bayesian, turns out to be not as clear as a lot of people believe it to be. And most people want to hear that, you know, you're in Bayesian class, so you want to hear Bayesian rocks and frequentist models suck, and so therefore, you know, rah, 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 you're in the right thing, and you're riding this tidal wave. And eventually you guys are going to be the only ones with the keys to the kingdom. That sounds great and all, but it's not really true. That and that's what I want to emphasize about maintaining a balance. But after we talk about the strengths and weaknesses of each one of these, and I want to discuss a few of the points that Goodman makes, and it's going to be one of the rare instances in which I'm going to be talking a lot today, but I would like to hear from what you guys have to say and what you are curious about this debate. the debate about replication, and also the debate about whether Bayesian statistics are the cure and how it fits. But a lot of what Goodman talked about in his articles, and I know that there were a lot of them. I hope you could sort through my giant morass of articles. But they were short, but they were poignant, and they are so absolutely spot on for today. The first point that I want to bring up is really about the complexity of frequentist ideas. You, as graduate students, learned about what Fisher and Pearson and Neyman viewed as the statistical methods for science. And what you learn is that you specify a priori some sort of design, you collect data according to that design and according to what you specified ahead of time, right? That my sample size is going to be 150 in each group if you're an experimenter. And that you will base your inferences on that design as specified a priori. Now, a lot of us don't hear it, we don't hear those instructions that way. What we hear is you design an experiment, you collect data, and then you test it using inferential statistics. But according to both Fisher and Pearson and Neyman, those are two different guys, but those are two separate camps in the frequentist models. They required, both camps required that whatever you specified a priori was absolute. You could not aim to collect 50 per group and then only collect 45 per group. Not good. And the reason for it is we collectively as scientists don't trust one another. We don't. And I don't think that that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just the state of affairs. Now, if you have any interest in learning about the history of science, read one book by Dava Sobel. She's a phenomenal writer, one of my favorites. And the book is called Longitude. And you will see, right now we're kind of mired in this crazy attack of scientists, one science group attacking another science group. And we're all saying, oh, this is terrible, what a horrible situation we found ourselves in. Because we're taking pot shots at one another, and many times they're cheap, and I grant you that. Read Longitude. It's a short book, it's about 100 and maybe 50 pages or so. We ain't got nothing on Newton and all of these people who just absolutely hated one another. I'm sure that if there were like mail bombs and stuff like that, like the Unabomber, these guys would have been all over it. They were nasty people. I think we just take to blogs and we say, he said this, she said that, we don't like you, and all of that. Very, very tame compared to what you'll read in Longitude. But the real problem is not really that frequentist models require this a priori fixture of collecting data and making inferences. The real problem is that it's so hard for non-statisticians to consume material that is reported from the frequentist perspective. There are tons of inferences that are oftentimes unarticulated. And because we've all kind of grown up together in social and behavioral sciences where frequentist models are the standard tools, we unfortunately believe that we understand them. And it's okay, sometimes belief is better than actual knowledge, but because it makes us feel good about ourselves and all of that. But the problem is that it also helps us be persuaded about things that aren't so, because we hold that belief. If you find evidence that is consistent with your beliefs, you will find that your standards drop way down. And for the things that you don't believe in, you have such ridiculously high standards that there's no way that anybody can provide you with adequate evidence for it. Now, do you notice that the way I'm talking about this, very, very consistent with the way we've been talking about Bayesian statistics, is that your beliefs really do put a huge burden on the amount of evidence required. Now, with frequentist models, we don't have that. But that's the reason why Fisher said frequentist models are superior to subjectivist models because they eliminate belief. He did not want people to be held accountable for their beliefs. So what he did was he mandated that the beliefs be set a priori. Let me explain this. This, the probability of the null hypothesis. 3 of these things, anybody know what that means? Yeah, is defined by 0.5. So it's not just that it's equal, it's that it must be. It's like a definition. You can't change the definition simply because it strikes your fancy. So the probability of the null hypothesis is defined by this, and this is, and I've mentioned this in passing before, but this is a critical assumption that most people do not understand. They don't even know that in order for frequentist models to even be interpreted, you have to start your experiment. You have to start whatever data collection you have, whatever theorizing you have, to the point where an equal probability in your head that the null hypothesis is true or false. There's an equal probability. Let me ask you a question. Think about any study that you've been involved in or that you've read. If you haven't been involved directly with data collection, that's okay, but you've read a bunch of things. Think of one study, just one, just whatever hypothesis they have, okay? Got one? Everyone got one? Okay. Keep thinking of it. Look at that. I would not be able to do that 10 times. Actually, I wouldn't be able to do it a second time. Okay. Everyone got a study in their head? At least a theory? Think of the null hypothesis associated with that theory or study or whatever. The primary finding. How many, with a show of hands, believe that the probability that the null hypothesis is true is 0? That's good. You guys are taking to my advice. Don't be extremists. How many believe that it's, for that one study, just for yours, is 0.1? So there's a 1 in 10 chance that it's correct. Okay. 0.2? Okay. 0.3. Whew. 0.4. Should have made my graph elsewhere. That's all right. You get the point. You know that one. 0.5. 0.6. 0.7. 0.8. 0.9. 1. Yes. All right. This is the distribution that this, by the way, is a beta distribution, right? You know that. You can estimate what that beta distribution is by these numbers. Okay? And that tells me that I had you sample from, think about it, the huge array of available studies to you guys is represented here. And you thought about this, and across all of these different fields and across all of these different studies, the findings that you selected, maybe at random or maybe because it was in the news or something that you're just fascinated by, that you selected this and your a priori beliefs are such that it's unlikely that it's 0.5. That if nothing else, you've shifted, one thing that we can gather from this is you've shifted to one direction. That is not favoring the null hypothesis a priori, right? So that means that your belief is more in line with not necessarily your favored perspective, but an alternative, right? Would you say that that's accurate? It's not that you're favoring your own pet theory, or maybe you are, but you're definitely not, you don't have an even perspective on the null. Okay. Because of this, yeah, fine.
So are you talking about your belief in like the idea of the null,
No.
the effect, or the way you've designed your study to evoke
It's
it?
yeah, that's a good question. So one is the theoretical hypothesis, and the other one is a statistical hypothesis, and that's a distinction I want to bring up. So Sam is asking, is the null hypothesis really a theoretical entity, or is it a statistical thing that has more to do with your study, with your measures, with your design, right? The null hypothesis is supposed to be, according to statisticians, a theoretical entity, okay? The problem is that we have two separate ways of envisioning, right? We envision it either as that in the data we will have two groups, and those two groups will be equivalent, right? So that's definitely in the statistical realm. But in theory, we say if we sampled people from the population at random and compared those two groups, whether we manipulated them or not, on some outcome measures, overall, what would we expect in terms of differences? Okay, so I'm envisioning this simply as a t-test, right? But the theory is, obviously, given large enough numbers of units sampled, and given the theoretical underpinnings of the measures, the outcome measures that you're interested in comparing, that the theoretical null hypothesis is the thing that we're envisioning. What I'm asking you here is more about the theory, less about the statistics. Could you actually produce the null hypothesis? Because I know we all are sophisticated enough to produce the null hypothesis, right? It's easy. Take the worst measures possible, right? Things that probably aren't even related to what you're interested in. Have the smallest sample size possible, because you need variance, right? You need a mean and variance. What else? For measures of association, take things that are known to be independent. For measures of difference, take things that are almost impossible to be different, like constants. That's always nice. So by sampling, by all of these things. So you can see that by statistics, we don't want to have the burden of thinking about the probability of the null from a statistical standpoint, because it's really easy to envision that there's a zero probability. In an article I didn't, I don't think I assigned this to you, but maybe I did at some point. But it's in that Bayesian reading, I believe. Paul Meehl wrote this great chapter in a book called "What If There Were No Significance Tests?" I know a bunch of my students have read it. It is a phenomenal article. And of this book that was written by Lisa Harlow and Stan Mulek, in this book is the only chapter worth reading. The rest of it is just, it really is a diatribe by hardcore anti-null hypothesis significance testing folks to denounce that statistical procedure. But what if there were no hypothesis tests, significance tests? And Paul Meehl's chapter is, oh crap, I can't remember the title. It's got like epistemology in it or something like that. I will circulate it if you want. Did I have you guys read that for this class? I typically have people read it for every class. Yes? You ready for this class? Okay, good. I can't remember. In that chapter, he distinguishes between these two, and he says the real problem is that statisticians believe this. But as scientists, we don't give one rat's ass about this. We care about this. So saying back to your question, statisticians will oftentimes say that this probability is associated with the experiment, with the data, with all of that. It's basically a statistical conundrum. But that is not so. In null hypothesis, in frequentist models, and by Fisher himself, he said that the null hypothesis is a theoretical and hypothetical situation.
So that's saying that you can't ever ask a question unless you're 50% confident in the null. So if you can't.
No, it doesn't. It's not that you can't. It's that the interpretation of frequentist models is dependent upon that.
Sure, yeah, that's what I meant. So
Yeah.
If I had a hunch that something was going on in the world, I couldn't.
Right. Now, from a statistician standpoint, it makes sense to view the null hypothesis from the data, right?
You could just sabotage your design until you think you're 50-50.
Exactly, because you really want to make sure that your design is giving it a 50-50 shot, that there is an even chance for the null. It's just that we don't want to do that, because that means that it leaves too much up to chance, and we really want to overpower our study as opposed to just having a coin toss, right? So this is a clear indication that our a priori notions are not going to be squaring well with the assumptions in null hypothesis significance testing with frequentist models. So inferences with frequentist models are likely to be corrupted. Now, the one thing that Goodman, a lot of things, I love Goodman, by the way. If you retain nothing else from this class, retain those articles. Just download all of those articles and reread Goodman from time to time. Yeah.
So what's the importance of starting at the equipoise part? Because why would you test something if you didn't have so much that it would work first?
Yeah, so why do that, right? It's because the likelihood and the p-value associated with that is determined by that a priori notion. That when you interpret the p of less than 0.05, that interpretation of the probability that the data being observed, given the null hypothesis is true, is dependent upon that 50-50 shot of the null hypothesis. If the null hypothesis were almost certainly wrong, or even down here, I mean, it's almost certainly wrong when it's got an 80% chance of being wrong, then the p-value becomes slightly different. The p-value is saying that the data being observed, given a low probability of this thing being true, all of a sudden that p-value actually may communicate either a chance finding, an artifact, right? Like Daryl Bam's work on, I don't know, anticipating the future. Have you guys read that? Oh, you gotta read that. It's good stuff. If you don't read it and you're not interested in this, at least see who the hell is the guy who did the lamp put on that? Stephen Colbert. Colbert, right? Yeah. I don't watch any of this stuff. He did a really funny thing, and all you have to do is search time traveling porn. Just search for it. It's with this dude who does this late night show, and he interviews Daryl Bam, and you'll see he has a very, very simple recap of Bam's 27 studies that show that undergraduates have a probability of 0.54 of detecting that the next picture is going to be pornography versus some inert picture that they're 0.48 probability. That's the difference. And he says the null hypothesis was rejected. I've abided by all of the rules of engagement for null hypothesis significance testing, and there you have it. So people can tell the future, but only if it's pornography. If it's not pornography, we have no idea what the hell's going to come. But you have to see this. Colbert does a nice job of putting this. Here is the problem: is we've all gotten really, really good at abusing the p-value. We're all really good at it. We get schooled, educated in graduate school about how to do things right. And the way we do things right, Joe, as I was mentioning here, there's a slim chance that the null hypothesis is true. Then what happens is the p-value oftentimes is not an accurate reflection of the probative value of your alternative. Okay, now that's one thing that Goodman talks about, is he discusses the Bayes factor. Okay, and the Bayes factor is really a pretty interesting idea, but it's one that's super simple about it all the time. If you take your priors and you multiply them by the Bayes factor, you get your posterior probability. That's it. I have been telling you all along that this is the likelihood. It is the likelihood, but it's the likelihood, it's a relative likelihood. And the reason why I like using these different ways of reinforcing and reminding you about Bayesian, about Bayes' theorem, is that you can use now different terms that correspond to really what you're interested in. Remember that in Goodman's discussion, and if this is not a memory of yours, then go back and read it. You'll appreciate it. That Goodman takes to task the critics of Bayesian statistics because he says that all Bayesian critics pick on this. This is Fisher's one thing that he died holding on to, is that statistics should, kind of like Newton, right? Or not Newton, Einstein. Einstein says nature doesn't, what is it? God doesn't play nature. No, God does not play dice with nature. Is that Einstein rejected any type of stochastic error-prone model. Well, similarly, rejected any type of subjective input into statistics. He said statistics should be very objective. Now, in the process of statistics, not in the interpretation of statistics, Fisher was very much in favor of people interpreting loosely the results, but you had to be educated about them. So Goodman kind of decomposes all the Bayes theorem, but in this way. And he said, the critics talk about the null hypothesis, the ardent supporters of null hypothesis significance testing say that this is the problem. But he says, there's a solution to that. You can either ignore the belief, or what you can do is you can change the belief. So for null hypothesis significance testing people, you can just set the belief to 0.5. He said that this Bayes factor is nothing more than just a focus on the evidence. So if you want to pick on Bayesian statistics, you can choose to pick on this, but it's really he says it's not a belief calculus. Then it has two components. It has belief and evidence. And then maybe a better way to do this is let's take a look at what the evidence would suggest. And that's why in the 80s and 90s, Goodman became the proponent of using Bayes factor as our yardstick for evidentiary contributions. Everyone ignored him for about 15 or 20 years, by the way. His articles, if you take a look at when they're cited now more than they ever were before. There was like this, it was like the Dark Ages. The Renaissance hadn't started, and people were sitting around chipping away at stones, and then all of a sudden they're like, holy crap, he's right. And then they started citing him. Because, back to the replication, we're running into a problem. Because the p-value, and go back and read Goodman's article carefully. The p-value is not really reflective of the probative value. That is the hunch that you get from the statistics. So whether it's like, oh, this is potentially true, as opposed to confirmatory value. The confirmatory value is you test something and you say, okay, if this exists, then this exists. When this doesn't exist, that doesn't exist. Okay, this is back to Bacon's 4 tables of scientific inquiry. We were raised on. Statistics doesn't tell us that, design does. But really what you want to think about is how is it that the p-value is communicating the existence or non-existence of the effects that we care about. Goodman's solution, Bayes factor. So Bayes factor is nothing more than a likelihood ratio. The likelihood ratio of the probability of our data, our hypothesis, over the probability of the data given the null hypothesis. It is just simply a likelihood ratio, okay? Because of that, this tells us what the evidence favors or disfavors. Now, this likelihood ratio could be flipped. It doesn't really matter. You just need to know what's on the top and what's on the bottom. Remember, ratios are part. Two-part. Okay. So you need to know what part is up here and what part is down there. And oftentimes you'll see that the parts that we're talking about here are flipped because take a look at the numbers. When they say the numbers are like teeny tiny, favoring the null hypothesis, then of course the null hypothesis, whatever your primary target is going to be on the top. Because we want bigger values, right? We want the probability of this being higher than that because that favors this. Make sense?
You do, but that's the whole question I'm asking.
Yeah.
Why would you, the equipoise thing of 0.5, yeah, you would want your, that's what I was saying. You want
Okay, go ahead. Ask that again.
So what's the importance of starting the equipoise? I thought that's what the beginning collection.
Yeah. So why start
Because
at?
that would just be one. Right?
Oh no. Because this is, you're not talking about the probability of the hypothesis. You're talking about the probability that the data would be observed. These are essentially p-values.
Okay.
Right? So that's a good question. Okay. No, that's okay. So that is an unconditioned probability. It's what's the veracity, what's the probability that this hypothesis is true, right? And so this one, unconditioned, these conditional probabilities, and incidentally, their likelihoods, and they only concern primarily the data. That's why I always say p-values reflect data testing, not hypothesis testing. It's null data testing. That's what it really should be. Make sense? Cool. Okay, now, flash forward to today, where we got all this exciting stuff, where things don't replicate. And they don't replicate simply because the p's that's the p-value that we're talking about here, do not really address the evidence, but we believe they do. So what Goodman decided to do was to come up with a hypothetical lowest possible value for each situation regarding the Bayes factor. So you saw that there's a very simple, there's a simple formula for the minimal Bayes factor. And he said that that's the lowest the Bayes factor can go, and so the interpretation of the Bayes factor should be based upon that. Now, there's been years and years of discussing Bayes factor, and people are saying, the Bayes factor is going to be so remarkably different, it's going to change everything that we have. Now, let's get together and decide what's the minimum acceptable Bayes factor to publish. Think of the p-value of 0.05. We're just recreating the same problem that we have right now, is that everybody wants a single number. Andrew Gelman talks about this as statistical laundering. I love that term. I think I've mentioned it before. It's one of my favorite new terms, because what we do is, as scientists, we come in with like, I don't know, think of it as like accountants. And when it came time in the 80s and 90s when I did my taxes, I didn't make enough money, but I felt like it was important to keep, I'm a pack rat, important to keep all of this documentation. And Kat and I would have these people do our taxes. So I'd walk in with this bin of receipts for everything and just drop it down. I'm like, okay, there you go. And they would look at me like, you're paying me $100 to go through this, and you're still gonna get a refund. I'm like, yeah. That's tax laundering. Not really laundering, I would hope not. But that's the same process by which, as scientists, this box of data and drop it off to the statistician, and the statistician would make sense of the data and then come back and say, you're like, wow, that's awesome. And then you go out with your friends and drink beer and all of that, and and you're celebrating this one thing. And what Goodman says is that one thing that you're celebrating is probably not indicative of the actual effect. Now, that's what you learn early on in statistics, is that p-values are not effect sizes, right? So we learn that, we hear it, we hear also other shit, and I mean shit, like correlation doesn't mean causation, but nobody ever tells you the flip side of that causation requires correlation. So you learn all of these little tiny things, but deep in our hearts, we don't embrace them, because we still look at this and we say, wow, that is way lower than 0.5. So how do we note this? Right? We don't give it just 1 star. We find new ways to throw different numbers of stars. Oh, and my favorite. I love these. I don't even know what they are. And I can never recreate them. I always have to copy and paste them. So we get all of these superscripts because they connote, they give you the impression that what you're looking at is important. And my favorite quote from Goodman comes actually from Fisher. And Fisher says, the p-value should be interpreted simply as an invitation to do more work in that area. Now I feel like I've been cheated because my favorite quote to all my graduate students is something that I never heard from anybody. I tell them that a PhD is not a terminal degree. Invitation to do more work. Well, now I can say adapted from Fisher, even though I didn't know that Fisher had ever said that. But Fisher says essentially the same thing, that the p-value, when the value is sufficiently low enough, lower than some value that you, remember, Fisher didn't like subjective stuff. But now he's saying you the interpreter. You, the interpreter, if this p-value is low enough for your satisfaction, you should do more work in that area. That's the way the p-value should be interpreted. Should be interpreted, but is not. It's interpreted as a measure of effect size. And we know that. We know that. Upon score of studies that have been collecting data on eminent scientists who should, well, should is a weird word, at least consult with people to tell them, no, don't say that, right? You know, like a script writer for the president, which I don't think one of these presidential candidates has a script writer. But if they do, wow, I want them on my team. Tell me what to say. No, I'll never say that. Well, what happens is even eminent scientists look at this and they say that this is the evidentiary basis for my big claim. Why did you put the headline, I don't know what's good stuff today. Something kills you.
Coffee. Water.
Coffee. Oh yeah, what's that?
Splenda.
Splenda. Yeah, sucralose. Sucralose kills you. Yeah, coffee, red wine, beer, you know, so, what's that?
The stuff in mountain models.
Oh, BPA, you guys are picking on me. Yeah, you know, like all this stuff that kills you, turns out it doesn't kill you. But that would really be sexy, so we have to tell people, holy shit, you're all gonna die. And then in parentheses, but probably not from BPA. But that doesn't sell. So instead, think about this. What are the headlines? How many of you have published an article where actually that you had a hand in writing the title? Anyone? Awesome. Okay. For those of you who haven't, don't worry about it. Your time is coming. Think about the type of headline you're likely to write. My results may be important and have some implications, or my results rock.
Yeah.
You're going to select the latter, not the former. And all of that is indicative of your interpretation of your significance value, or even if you interpret the effect size. Suppose you go out and you calculate the effect size. Problem with effect sizes is you're not calculating the uncertainty around the effect size. That is the problem with interpreting single effects. Hence, Goodman says, you can't interpret one hypothesis in isolation of another. In research design and methods, how many of you have taken a methods class, like one that is really talks about design and methodology? Awesome. Some with me, right? Methods are way more important than statistics. Why? Because you learn something, and a key term, you learn something about counterfactuals, okay? So the counterfactual is really important here. And no statistician wants to talk about this because statisticians believe that theirs was like the dark arts, you know, that they were the ones that held on to the secrets. And no, I don't know anything about Harry Potter. I mentioned this some time ago, and someone says, "Oh, you're a Harry Potter fan." I'm like, what? No. I'm sure I would like it, but I haven't seen it. But statisticians believe that there's like some sort of dark arts where they're the people who have access to the real knowledge. And Goodman says that that's the problem. The problem is not with null hypothesis significance testing. Everything that I've talked about here, that's not the problem. The problem is that there are all of these circumstances that have to take place before the study, like designing the question, right? Having the a priori notion that there's equipoise for the null hypothesis. That the study has to be designed for those questions where the null has a fighting chance. This shift is dangerous. That the design and then the implementation of the study has to comply with the frequentist notion, with Fisher's notion. Fisher won in this regard. That when Fisher said, "Thou shalt collect the number of observations that thou'st a priori specified," if you fail to do that, all of your inferences are off. Now, why he goes on to justify it? Because essentially he said, "I don't believe you guys. I think that you guys are going to stop data collection when you see an effect large enough, and it could be those observations that you would have collected afterwards would counter the effect that you observed." Now, these people did statistics by hand. I am confident, I don't know, but I'm confident that some poor SOB is not sitting there tabulating all of these things, calculating it, looking up in tables and going, "Oh, we gotta stop. We got our p-value. Let's stop." But Fisher somehow or another believed that that process was going on. He thought that the p-value could be corrupted. He knew it. So he said, you've got to specify a stopping point a priori. So that's what statisticians should be telling people. When, any of you guys worked on a project where there was a biostatistician hired to do the analyses? Yeah? Okay, yeah. They're a pain in the ass. Typically, I'm that pain in the ass. When did this data analyst or biostatistician start working with you on the project? Yes, after the data were already collected. Did you collect all of the experimental units that you had decided to a priori? Probably not. It's okay. It's the law of disappearing subjects, which includes rats, mice, guinea pigs, banana slugs, and humans. They all die. I don't know what the hell happens, but that is the problem. That a lot of this is we're talking about a whole process. The process by which the statistician or data analyst has to be involved from the beginning to guide the whole process, to carry it through, to get to the end, to analyze the data and make correct inferences. And only then is this person, the purveyor of the dark arts, are they capable of then communicating what the level of uncertainty is about the null hypothesis? And the problem is that they're not even conveying the uncertainty about the null hypothesis. They're conveying the uncertainty about the data relative to the null hypothesis, which is even further confounding to most scientists. Because as scientists, we care about testing our theories. Statisticians are concerned about testing the statistical procedure. And what Goodman says, and I thought this was funny, in an article written in 1990 or 89 or something like that. That all of these, you know, the serfs and peasants called physicians have now gained access to this statistical software that they're able to run statistics, and they're encroaching on our territory. So we need to make it simpler for them. Have you ever done this? Like when you're talking to somebody who doesn't speak your language and you find yourself yelling at them after a while? It's the same thing with statisticians. So they're just talking to us, but now they're yelling at us because they think that we're dumb. And what they don't understand is that we don't understand what they understand, and they don't understand what we understand. And that's the divide. So what I'm arguing here is that null hypothesis significance testing, the tool itself is not a problem. It's the cognitive complexity of the tool that makes it problematic. And that's one of the reasonable arguments that one could make in favor of Bayesian statistics, because we are, in essence, all Bayesians at birth. We think about things from a conditional probability, but mostly about inferences of things that we care about. So these are things that we don't care about necessarily. We have to use statistical tools in order to come up with these things. Computers and all of that. Now, Goodman says now that computers have given us all access to these tools, that now what we have to do is we have to create some new tools to help everybody understand things. And that's why he's been advocating for the longest time, actually since the 70s, that we should be all using Bayesian statistics. Sounds great. You're in Bayesian class. I've been telling you all along that you really need to understand Bayesian statistics. Now I've talked to you about things that you already know, but I'm putting them into context and talking to you about how you can communicate this. If you learn nothing else, you have to learn balance. So Goodman's got this idea that statisticians are all knowing. You know, it turns out statisticians interpret the p-values incorrectly. We went to a meeting, a joint meeting of the American Statistical Association, and we sat through a few talks about how to interpret and how to report p-values. Holy shit. You would think that that would be like, well, terribly boring, but what it turned out to be is it was exciting as hell, because it was a shouting match among statisticians. This stuff I live for. Like, you know, grown-ups behaving badly. I love it. Fantastic. And they're arguing about how to report p-values. I was thinking, wow, couldn't there just have been a conversation at the bar? Instead, they had this huge panel, and there's 20 people on this committee, and they've now just come out with how to report and whether we should be using p-values. Yeah, this exists. And the report's findings, p-values are hard to interpret. Why? Because there are eminent statisticians, people you've read about, not knowing that you read about them, but people who develop statistics, who evaluate them, who really think critically about these. They disagree, and they disagree vehemently, apparently, because enough so that they can stand up in a crowd and say, "You're wrong," like in the middle of the guy's talk. I'm like, oh, this is good. I love it. They didn't have enough popcorn and beer. I would have sat there for days. So there's disagreement on how to interpret the p-value, and really what the p-value communicates to statisticians and what it communicates to scientists. So they couldn't even agree on how people misinterpret the p-value, let alone how to correctly interpret it, which to me was like almost science fiction, right? And Goodman was there, and he raised his hand. He's an older guy now, and he just said, "You know, this sounds really fascinating, but most of this could just go away if we just stopped talking about it. And then there was like this hush that fell in the room. Like, that's right. It would go away if we just stopped talking about it. If we stopped elevating the p-value to be something that it isn't. And I think in most cases, statisticians and the public will agree that the p-value does not communicate importance, and it doesn't communicate effect size. Those, I think, are the two things that you guys can all walk away and say, with confidence, I can say, this is what it doesn't do. I challenge you to communicate to anyone, and including your grandmother, but to anybody also of any import that you would really like to talk to about this, about what the p-value does communicate. And use my terms and say the p-value is really data testing. And I would say that the lion's share of the statisticians would agree with that. But there are people who say, no, it's not about that data, it's about hypothetical data. I'm like, whoa, okay. This is like, I don't know, the 11th dimension and string theory. Like, I don't understand that. But there's a lot of different ways in which you can interpret it, and the implications of that interpretation will actually be fairly evident. You could do that, or what you could do is you could start looking for alternatives. Now, again, a lot of people find it so easy to jump off the bus and go, okay, I'm out of here. I am off. I'm not ever going to do null hypothesis significance testing again. And I say, whoa down there. Because in most of your fields, you will not be able to communicate anything without a p-value. They will want to know the significance. They will want to know, and in fact, I've had discussions with colleagues of mine who say something silly like, I don't want a GLM, I want an ANOVA. Jane and I have had these discussions. Don't go there. I want p-values, I want cell means, I want standard deviations, I want cell counts, I want, like that's what they want. And the reason for it, and I don't think that this is something to disregard. I think this is an important part of science, is we all develop a comfort with numeracy. Now sometimes it's wrong, but we develop a comfort with numbers. So we like to see means and standard deviations, even though means and standard deviations, there's a lot of garbage behind those because we don't know what the distribution looks like. And that's one thing I really want you to pay attention to for this second project, is that real data are not really well suited for a single distribution. Real data. Now, I'm not talking about like Walmart data where there's like millions and billions of observations about like what's the mean amount of money that people spend when they go to Walmart. Real data, but that's a shitload of real data. And those distributions turn out to be looking pretty normal when you have close to an infinite sample. But I'm talking about real data for your perspective. And real data are sample sizes of 10 to 50 or maybe 500 when if you're lucky enough and you have a sample size of 500, you're celebrating. It's all of that. But a sample size of 500 means that the p-value is almost totally uninterpretable because your statistical power is 0.9999999, and the only thing that would be remarkable is if you failed to find something significant. That's the shit you should report. Say everything else is significant except for this one thing. Isn't that cool? But I used the worst measure possible, and I did everything that I could corrupt this thing. So the real data that we have do not really conform to real distributions. And in this second project, I would like you to think carefully about what those distributions look like. Think carefully about what those distributions might look like and how you can model them. Now, this is the departure from like simple point estimates, and I told you I'm getting there, but simple point estimates to looking more at the continuum. Because when you start looking at the continuum, a lot of times you start looking at distributions that might be bimodal, right? They may not characterize the ideal distribution as you view it, but it's still gonna have a mean and a standard deviation, right? It just won't really characterize your data or even your best guess. Start plotting some weird data, real data, small data sets, things that you're likely to work on. And I think what you're gonna find is that this supposed panacea, the solution to all null hypothesis significance testing problems, starts to get a little muddier, because when we start working with real data, the simplicity of the update function goes away. And we start needing to use random walk procedures, which you should be reading about at this point, called MCMC. There's all sorts of MCMC procedures. The one that you probably see most of, is the Gibbs sampler. And the Gibbs sampler is this procedure by which we try through a random walk procedure to find the shape. And I always tell people on MCMC, it's kind of like walking around to I don't know, what do they call that, the mall? Grassy area between all the buildings. JC.
Or the quad.
Yeah, the quad,
Yeah.
okay. So if you walk out to the quad and you take a look to see where's the highest portion of the grass? Not that that's an important question, but it is an important question when you think of your data. If you think of it in terms of 2 dimensions, where is the shape? Where are you likely to find the most likely highest peak? And where is it going to be a false peak? And the reason why we need that is we need to characterize the shape. So that then when we take our priors, sometimes our priors will even look like that, because we've recycled a posterior as a new prior. So that's going to look like that. And then add evidence to then get a posterior. And that's the reason why you guys are going to be using more sophisticated tools. Don't use any hand calculations for this. Use more sophisticated tools. I don't want you to use Stan. Stan at this point is overkill. It's kind of like using a howitzer to kill a gnat. But I'd rather you think of it more as a procedure that you can use some built-in functions. Like the first project, you could use the best, but it was for a single sample, right? So 1 sample t-test. The second project, you can use best, but you need 2 samples. And what I would like you to do is really think about beliefs versus evidence. Remember, I talked about this with one of the groups where, oh yeah, it was Jose's, 4 PCAPs. That you want to play around with this distinction between how much of your beliefs will offset the evidence and how much evidence do you need to offset strong beliefs. The one thing you will learn very quickly, so I'm going to tell you the punchline, is the easiest belief to update is 0.5. The easiest belief to update. It takes just a wee tiny little bit of evidence to shift you from 0.5. Now think about that. What did I start this whole conversation about?
Replicability.
Yep. And then I said, okay, there's a hidden assumption in null hypothesis significance testing, which was,
The null hypothesis.
yeah. So really, there's a lot of baggage here, right, in replicability, and that there's some stuff in our models, in our hypothesis testing models, where equipoise is kind of king. And then I just told you at the tail end, not quite the tail end, that the real problem that we run into is that our ability to change our beliefs is dependent upon our prior beliefs. And this is the classic argument against Bayesian statistics. Okay, I'm gonna tell you that. The classic argument against Bayesian statistics is that the posteriors are heavily dependent upon the priors. And I will tell you, yes, they are. But more often than not, we make it too easy for null hypothesis significance testing. Because our priors in null hypothesis significance testing, easiest priors to update. They are the easiest priors. We need the least amount of evidence. Because of that, there doesn't require a whole lot of material substance to shift our perspective. And that was the big discussion in this ASA panel. So they said the real difficulty with null hypothesis significance testing is that we have shifting standards of evidence based upon, as Paul Neal said, whose ox is being bored. As if it's your ox, all of a sudden you become very, very stringent. But if it's somebody else's, right, you become quite lax and you're like, ah, it's okay, we can rule them out. But for me, this is my theory, and I want to have, even if there's just a shadow of doubt of its existence, I'm willing to rule out the null. So I want you, for this second project, to mess around with this. Change your beliefs. In the first project, you really fixed your beliefs pretty much across the board in all of the different perspectives. But I want to show you, just by your own doing, by your own hand, that by changing this, the same level of evidence has a different effect. Now, essentially what you're going to be doing is you're going to be reifying the argument against Bayesian statistics by frequentness. Okay? Then, what I would like, now you don't have to present all of this, but really this is about educating yourself so that you can step forward in your presentation and be more confident about your findings. Then fix 3 or 4 values of your priors. The evidence. Okay, just change the evidentiary basis for which the posteriors are going to be dependent on. And this is what you're going to find out. Priors don't matter as much as the evidence. So I've given you the punchline. Now you got to figure out what the joke is. Okay? You got to go back and take a look to see whether I'm right. And if I'm not right, I want to see it. Okay? And that'll be good. Now I've run thousands of these models. And for the most part, everything that I'm saying, there are many instances though that I'm wrong. Not just in this, I mean many instances I'm wrong. I have a wife, she tells me all the time. I'm good with that. But with this, it is sensitive in certain regards. Sensitive, think about that. So distributions matter. Do they fit a singular distribution, or are they kind of wonky like this, like bimodal? Do you have, how do you gauge evidence? So evidence, strong evidence, could be, you think that a coin, make it simple, you think a coin is fair, 0.5, and all of a sudden you flip 100 consecutive heads. Now, is that a lot of evidence? Because you've got 100 coin tosses, right? 100 positives and 0 negatives. Is that fair? And is that a strong case against having a fair coin? Versus 10 coin tosses. And at what point does the evidence have to build up in terms of numbers? Law of large numbers, guys. That if you have more and more observations that are one-sided, is that stronger evidence then a few that are definitive. This is a key element to inference. So there's this rule I'll talk about later, that there are statistical rules of thumb, and some of them are really quite unique. If you want to know about the probability of the non-existence of something, right, essentially the null, you can count sequentially cases, and with each case that you count that comes up null, you can calculate the posterior probability simply by that sequence. Pretty cool. It's called the law of sevens. We'll talk about that later. Sorts of heuristics that you can use to calculate the posterior probability. But what I want you to do is I want you to figure out, how can you break Bayes' rule? How can you break it such that the priors and the evidence can change such that you can see a sensitivity of one over the other? Null hypothesis significance testing proponents will tell you that overwhelmingly the beliefs outweigh the evidence. I can tell you after countless trials, plus a lot of reading. So, but you need to see it yourself. Okay? Okay, now, I want to stop here for a second and take a break for about 10 minutes. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk to you about the difference between what you do and what you report. This is critical. Presentations. All right, 10 minutes. We'll reconvene. All right, ready, break. Everybody can stand up.
I have questions. Oh, yeah.
Jesus Christ, it was good. I love that.
I put it up in there. Order. I'm gonna go.
And
All right,
what's
I'll
the
go.
answer?
Yeah. Yeah.
Control plus
There's one back there.
JCSS.
Or like Google how to do it.
Yeah.
Like book the sheet. and
Yeah,
then try
exactly.
it.
That's what I do. That's what I do. Kevin, when you get back, I want to hear about your cooking exploits. Anything unique recently?
Do you know that we have a lot of district on
Oh, right.
so
Forgot about that.
we added that in tomatoes because texture variant.
No, shit, that's awesome.
Can't dry. And there's no.
Well, that sucks. When you go out for Italian food and you have some wine, then you have to draw.
Right. But we added that in tomatoes to do
Hold the course. Wow.
Sometimes like fancy word thing.
I'm so good.
Yeah.
Although, so this is the first time I read it. I never used to like oysters and things like that. They're made for you, you don't understand like what goes into it. It's right now.
Right.
I don't know what this thing is. So the first time I made it at home, I found myself kind of doing all this spitting the same thing because I had never experienced it before.
Yeah, great.
I've been there.
Because sometimes when I'm bringing
Look at
it, I'll forget to put it over.
Don't read
Staring at the.
Yeah, you-
Bro.
And I come in and it's quiet.
Yeah, because they detected.
Yes. So it happened like 2 or 3 times and then I caught them. I got to go over.
Well, you would have. You would have. Have you ever seen one of those guys wielding a knife?
Well, we had that one time where I was always
Why? Because it was been collapsed.
no, because
there's like this fine line between.
I finally got my bag.
We're like, keep your voice in.
Now, it's just like-
It's misleading.
But he was not gonna be worse than ours, because he trashed.
He realizes that they might be
That was last week before.
This
This
guy
guy was seeing us like, do we see this? And I was like,
It's funny because once we figured
shut
out.
your poor mouth right now, asking if all you see stuff. I was at a class.
And
I was a classical studies minor, so I was like, my shit. And I like met this guy, I had to go, and I was like, are you stalking me? Are you trying to act smart to me right now?
So this funny because like.
Stop being so perfect. You have to have
I was in here and this.
Yeah, right.
But like, you should the best, you know, the least about it. A bunch of arrowheads, like, from the actual.
Those are so good.
Was it really?
Apparently.
Well, I wanted to tell you, that night I discovered.
It looked like Super
Or there hadn't been a sign being like, the actual arrowheads around, like, oh, look, they like yeah, like they were like,
No, when I fought her,
yeah, it's like some archaeologists shot their box and just act triangle side to side.
like that.
They were around for a long time.
It caramelizes the the apples are key because the apples keep the moisture 400 level high. We try to
So like even more.
apples are so like try to find it's supposed to be French toast on apple.
Oh, it sucks.
So like,
were you like, or like anything out there where you like you're just gonna bring a lot of game for a while and maybe die. Saddest thing though. Like, for some reason, they don't sell a lot of
You have to try.
and they have like the most of them are bonus, like.
I love surprise.
And so like, skinny girls trying and like they're big and will like have like aerial marker game.
Follow very, very nicely.
And then like, yeah, and like more often than not, it's just like dive all the time, like when you get the shot of giant trout, like can you imagine just if that was just like
We love the I hate it when it's like, just a little bit, and it's,
I mean,
I don't know.
right? I mean,
It's like,
oh my God.
and,
That's no way to live.
Yeah, that's my life, not worth it. That's pretty good.
No.
So Sharon can, she can,
Yeah, she can eat.
They have like the Greek guy is really bad.
I'm gonna meet with him.
But
it's
and if I never ate
special friend. Well, yeah, that's what it was. It's like mentors and mentees, and we like teach them like this is all like here's how politics works, also some like that. And I was just totally like, really difficult. It's so weird. Yeah, it goes down on his wife, like just
That's not what I'm talking
You're like,
good luck to me.
you might not share.
So you know what?
Yeah, just like any sort of this is that trend, like this is real. Yeah, like it's like a sort of
Every time we ask. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah.
I requested them like that, but like basically it's like got crushed and it's shattered. She just like saws it off basically. Like actually
Wait, me too. Lisa.
Oh.
Yeah, this one.
Jake, what else might we should pause it or
You just have to like let her know. And then there's like, there should be like Mr. Park. Yeah, we can figure that out. Yeah, actually, I think it would be. Yeah.
I love it. I get
But yeah, I mean, yes.
Somebody wrote.
How's it going? Good? Sounds good, thanks.
As far as I know,
Why did you watch it? Orange.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things right now. So many projects. And I'm just like, involved at least two. West End. That was through a while ago, and we have two things with West End right now. One is the mind wandering stuff, which is getting finished up, and the new one that we just got with them is the advanced control displays grant. We won that beginning of the semester, so we've been working on it since then. We got the lit redone. Oh, we got it edited. Or we got like a first draft. They came back and were like, all right, well, we need this added to that. So now we're working on that. Then we got to start designing the studies, getting the research for that.
All right, we went 5 minutes over. I apologize. Good opportunity.
The RB just went through, got approved for track 2, and track 1 was already approved. So we'll start collecting that as well. It's all very exciting.
Slow down. Hey, everyone. We're back. Sorry, we took an extra 5 minutes, but I wanted to talk more about what you do as data analysts and what you report. Because this is something that, as novel data analysts, you're going to feel compelled to report every freaking thing that you do, every decision that you make, and there's no space for it. And people that, as a data analyst, I spend more hours doing things that I never tell anybody about. And it's not because I want to hide it. It's just that there's a lot of work that goes on in the background that you don't want to bore people with. It's the same as telling people a story. So my wife's family, they're Irish, but they lost the gene of telling good stories. It skipped their entire family. And when they tell a story, they go off on all of these tangents. And I drink a lot there because it makes their stories funnier, or more coherent, or maybe less coherent, which is better. But you know bad storytellers when they start going off on all these different tangents, like, whoa, is that relevant? We all know those people. And some of us are those people.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's all right. But you know it and to detect. Because as soon as you start saying to yourself, do I really need to know that level of detail? The answer is almost certainly no. So what happens when you do Bayesian analysis? This is one of the tricky dilemmas that Bayesians have nowadays, because with frequentists have a huge advantage over Bayesians. Because you can use one word, and that one word is supposed to communicate a whole line of reasoning and justification and process and all that you can just use that one word. The reason why I love profanity, because that one word communicates so much, And it's the way you say it that communicates it. It's awesome. Unlike Germans, that you guys have to tack on all these different words to where the one word for sometimes there are German words that we don't have any similar thing, and we'd have to have a whole sentence to communicate one word. Now, of course, that one word in German is like 650 letters, but the Germans can pronounce it, and when they pronounce it, you go, "Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about."
There are no follow-up questions.
Well, yeah, but there doesn't need to be, because when you hear that one word, you're like, "Got it." I see exactly what you're talking about. Statistics, you have to have that mentality. You have to run a lot of procedures. So I talk in 611 and 612 about exploratory data analysis. As Bayesians, you cannot ignore that step. You have to explore your data. If you don't explore your data, you have no fucking idea what you're doing. You have to know what the distributions look like, and you have to plot. That's the reason why I talk about plotting last week, is that ggplot is a tool, but it's a tool more for you as a data analyst to first convince yourself that what you've done is right. And then when you're going to convince other people, the story has to be short. It has to be, it can't be this code I used and all of that, because you know what your audience is looking at? They're looking at like a 2-point font, especially in this room. And they don't want to see code. I don't want to see code. Even though I like code. I don't want to see it. Not the story. That makes the story really boring. So you have to figure out what it is that you want to reveal to people. And in Bayesian statistics, it gets more dicey because you know that you made a lot of decisions. Now, in the first presentation, you guys did a great job of talking about the decisions that you made. Stick with that. Okay, there are certain decisions that are critical, other decisions that are less critical. Okay, and those you can always keep in your back pocket for the Q&A session. Okay, because as you get better at reporting statistics, you'll find that you're not going to report every stinking thing, even with frequentist models. You don't. You skip over stuff because of the ability for your audience to be able to complete the model, right? Complete the story. Now, with your presentations, I strongly encourage you to anticipate your audience. Think about your audience. Your audience is not your classmates. Your audience are your parents, your aunts and uncles, people who wouldn't have the foggiest idea. I don't know, maybe you come from a long line of PhDs or statisticians. Those are not your audience, okay? Disown your family just for a period of time. Suspend belief that you're of that family, and talk to an audience that has no idea. They have an idea about the question that you pose. They have an idea about how you want to convey your evidence, sort of. But you have to tell them the importance of what you're doing and how you've come to the understanding that in essence, that you're likely to be wrong, right? I mean, that's essentially accepting, or if you believe that the null was correct, that you were right all along, right? But do a lot of work in the background, but don't report that work. I know that sounds so odd for somebody to tell you that you're going to be graded on what you don't say rather than what you do say. Doesn't that seem weird? Because you guys are of the mind, and I know this in graduate school I was the same way, is that if I had done all of this, damn it, I'm going to show that I did all of it. So if there was a 10-page paper due, I would write every word of the 10-page paper and squeeze in as much shit as possible into that. See, profanity is great. You got exactly what I was talking about. But that's not the way you should model your behavior. Brevity, concision. If a 10-page paper is adequate, write 3. But 3 good ones, not 3 randomly selected. of the 10. But the same goes for, again, if you're going to present details about Bayesian statistics, present the ones that are most informative to your naive audience. Okay, they're not dumb. They just don't know about this material. So if you produce code in R, they don't know R. They don't want to know R. They want to know what your interests are. So this is a plea for you to move in the direction of the same way a data analyst like me would write sections in a paper, several hours of data analysis, and report a sentence. It's very unrewarding sometimes. I want to write down the 3 hours of stuff that I was thinking about. But it doesn't make for a good copy. It doesn't make for a good story. Okay, so become better storytellers. And in this presentation, what we're doing is we're going to work toward taking the material, and this is really applied. So taking the material, and as I told you before, my toughest job is not teaching statistics. My toughest job is communicating. That's by far the toughest job. The people that I work with, the contracts that I have, they don't know anything about statistics. They, if I said I did Bayesian analysis, they go, oh. And they wouldn't follow it up with, tell me more. So I have to tell them, I don't use words like that. Use with words that they understand. So they understand belief. Use those words. They understand evidence. Use those words. Okay? Use the words that are common to everyday people. And what you can do is you can report and present your ideas from that in the simplest way possible. Now, many of you will say, well, how does that convey what I've really done? And I say, well, simplicity oftentimes communicates a deeper understanding than complexity. If you write out the whole story of what took place, that does not convey a deep understanding. That's a very shallow understanding. So the deeper you can penetrate into this topic and apply these tools, the more you're going to force yourself. Essentially, this is my halftime talk. Then I'm going to force you to really think at a deeper level of this. Because this, while this seems such a trivial project, it turns out that this is a hard problem. This is a way harder problem than really what it sounds like. Convince people that the null is correct. That's it. Build a story around it. Convey that this is a complex problem. And also think about why is it that you wouldn't use null hypothesis significance testing and instead opt for this Bayesian approach. But you remember, you have to do it in such a way that is not using those terms. If you can do that, that conveys the highest level of understanding. This goes to, as I talked about my helix model of learning, is you move up the helix, principled application requires you to have a much broader perspective. And as you read and reread, the resources that I'm giving you, Elizabeth and I were talking about this yesterday. The resources I'm giving you are resources that you should be using over a long period of time. Okay, and that you will revisit. You're not going to master all of this during this class. This is to nudge you, to push you in the direction to give you the tools that you can be different. And if you can be different using Bayesian statistics in your field, and you learn how to principally apply them, but concisely in a good story, and also not at the expense of your colleagues. Because sometimes your colleagues, you will find people are believers. They either believe or they don't believe, which is the same as believing. It's just believing in the thing that you don't believe in. Right? Be gentle to them. And I think you'll find that they come closer to you. If you hit them with "you're full of shit," the first thing you find is that they start checking their email. That they're not willing to engage, and that's again part of you need to come closer to the idea of null hypothesis significance testing and Fisher's idea of equipoise. Is that if you can at least convince people that, you know what, I'm on the fence too. Let me tell you one reason that's kind of pushing me over. I always find that that's the best way to convince people. Just to start from a position of centrality or maybe neutrality. It doesn't mean that you have to be, it's just that it's easier to convince people. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be doing a lot of work in the background, but all that work is to inform you and to provide you with the stuff that makes a better story. Okay? So, you guys are going to be meeting, we have next class, and then the following one, you guys are going to be, it'll be a wild free-for-all. But between now and that wild free-for-all, please ask questions, okay, about the second project, about, different ideas, bounce ideas off one another, but bounce them off me too, and Jay. I don't want to lose Jay out. Okay? Sound good? Tell. Be good. Story. That's important. All right. Questions? Concerns? Bitches? Gripes? Moments? None? Fine. Woohoo! But do email me, do chat, if you got questions, okay?
Hey, Ben.
Yes, sir.
Sometimes I think about something you said a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I can never remember exactly what it is. I can remember it. Today, talking about how the research for the statistician comes on the end.
Yeah.
I was say, did I miss anything important when I was there? Because I tried to get class.
No, we went over, what was
Yes.
it called, change blindness,
Yeah.
change detection.
Oh, you're gonna show me that one.
Nothing.